Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, celebrating filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. Today, Film Ireland contributor and academic Naemi Victoria catches up with documentary filmmaker Paul saying Reality Is Not Enough is a dynamic portrait of Scottish writer Irvine Welsh that explores his creative journey through DJing, drug experience and literary work, and it offers intimate insights into the author's multifaceted world. This podcast has been made possible with the support of Screen Ireland. Have a listen to the trailer here.
So we're here tonight to talk about Irvine's new book, his 13th novel and his 17th work of fiction. On top of that, he's now a DJ, has his work adapted for radio, TV, film and theatre. Welsh has produced many imitators, but few equals, and he has outlasted them all.
I mean, Trainspotting is not my best book, but it's the one I'll be remembered by. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
I never liked it.
The characters that you create are all different aspects of you.
You got off heroin, you got off all the shit, but the writing solved that. Are you happy now?
I'm worried that I'm morphing into one of these writers that I used to detest.
And you are in.
You said when we embarked on this great adventure together that lots of laughter was essential in a relationship.
I always saw life as a big canvas that unfolds, and I don't think you should be limited to any one place.
Life is a dynamic rather than a static process.
When you're young, you feel that life is trying to confine you in some ways.
Increasingly, life seems fractured.
I like to challenge and annoy and disturb and irritate myself in a write.
I'm more of a warrior than you'll ever be.
You compromise more when you get older, and it's not always a good thing.
We are all connected to a greater force.
There's different realities contained within us all, and writing is a way of finding some of these different realities.
First of all, hi everyone, I'm Naemi Victoria. I'm a writer for Film Ireland, so I review films for Film Ireland, and I'm also a second-year PhD student. And my research project focuses on working class representation in British popular film. So I'm very excited to get to talk to you, Paul. So first of all, a really warm welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Reality Is Not Enough is the title of your latest documentary about the renowned British writer Irvine Welsh. And could you tell us a bit about your relationship with his work? Where did you first encounter it, and how did this project come into being?
Yeah, the first time I encountered Irvine's work was like probably most people in the film Trainspotting, and I saw it at the cinema in 1996, and I'd never seen anything like it. And you know, I think some people think Trainspotting is a film about drugs, but for me, it's a film about friendship. It's a film about young and a celebration of, you know, those two things, being young and being in a group of friends. And I read the book probably a couple of months after I'd seen the film, and found it, you know, initially tough to get through the Scots. I mean, I live in Scotland now and have done for 7 years. So to me now, you know, it's like I don't speak Scots, but I can understand it, and it's you know, it's something that I really enjoy reading as well as listening to. But I mean, Irvine's work spoke to me. I've always felt a bit of an outsider. I'm from a working class family. My dad's Chinese, my mum's English, and I grew up in a single parent family. My dad wasn't, you know, around. I saw him, you know, for a lot of my childhood. Then he moved to Australia. So I've, you know, didn't really fit into either of those two worlds as a youngster. I wasn't really you know, part of the kind of white working class community on the estate where I grew up. Didn't really know any Chinese people, and so I always felt like an outsider. And I think in Trainspotting and a lot of Irvine's work, he writes really well about what it is to be an outsider and how you can celebrate that, and how, you know, you don't have to conform. So that's initially what really spoke to me in his work.
Yeah, the sense, I think that is also really well reflected in the documentary. It captures this rebellious spirit and the defiance What I also found really striking about it was that rather than revolving about people celebrating his work, going on about how, because we all know that it's good stuff, the documentary offers this more poetic approach to like his experiences, his recollections that are then blended with these quotes from his writing. And I was just wondering, how did this documentary structure come to you? How did that just happen with the material, or how did that come about?
It was initially a decision. I set myself a rule of, no talking heads. I wanted to try and put the audience into Irvine's head and let Irvine speak for himself. And the people that he meets in the film are people that he was meeting anyway most of the time. So it was hanging out with friends or working with Dean, his screenwriting partner, or hanging out with his wife, or doing events, that sort of stuff. And so the way that the structure developed was, once you've shot all that material, you kind of need a unifying device. And the device of using a DMT trip, the drug, for anyone that doesn't know, that's derived from ayahuasca, which is a hallucinogenic experience that's been compared to a near-death experience. One of the questions, one of the themes of the film is mortality, existence. And at the beginning of the film, we sort of find Irvine at a bit of a crossroads. His hedonistic days are kind of, drawing to a close, but he has one last roll of the dice and takes DMT. And we use that trip to kind of explore his life, his subconscious, his thoughts and feelings. So we filmed him in an abandoned warehouse wearing a white suit. And as he wanders through the dark, there are projections of, clips from his films, archive of the times he lived through. So, poll tax riots, miners' strike, rave culture, the scheme where he grew up, and then footage from the film itself. So he's literally walking through his memories. And it's at that point that we hear Irvine telling us his deepest, darkest thoughts and secrets about where he grew up, what motivated him to become a writer, his thoughts on subjects like grief and love, addiction, all of this stuff. So, and then as well, throughout the film, you have the actuality of what he was doing in that 18 months, and then clips from the work, from the films, and novel readings by Liam Neeson, Stephen Graham, Ruth Negga, Maxine Peake, Helen Behan, and a couple of emerging working class actors called Olivia Court and Mark Hanna. So you've got everything in the film is thematic. The story is driven through what Irvine's telling us about, these big weighty subjects and about his life. So yeah, it was definitely a conscious decision that it wouldn't be a kind of linear narrative of, Irvine was born in such and such and then this happened, this. It was something that was much more experiential, where you feel that you're spending time with him and, really getting to know him a little bit.
I also think that this non-linearity does his work justice, in a sense. I think like this A to B to C doesn't really cover it. So I think that was really well captured in the documentary.
Thank you.
You already brought that up, the themes of mortality, and I think very much life as well. So because mortality and life are so closely connected, but I was so vivid. The images as well with the light when he's walking, like the projection and everything, literally looking back into his past. And just because I'm doing research on this, but like this sense of nostalgia, well, he was like recollecting growing up in Edinburgh, and also the relationships he had, what shaped him as a human being, and his experience was so, for me at least, tinged with nostalgia. And I was just wondering, was that like an overarching theme that just emerged from the material, or was that something you then ended up looking for?
I think it was something that was, Irvine isn't a nostalgic person generally. He's never really one to like look back. He's always looking at what's next. He's always keen to go on to the next thing. And at the very beginning of the project, the film originally, because you know what it's like, you go through lots of different cuts of the film, and for the first 3 or 4 cuts, there was a quote at the beginning from Soren Kierkegaard, which many people will know this quote. It's a very well-known quote, but the quote is, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And that, for me and Angela, the editor, was a bit of a mantra for us, because we, Irvine was looking back, but in being a non-nostalgic person, how do you avoid it purely being just about nostalgia? And I think for us, that quote helped us, because it was, almost excusing that nostalgia was the only way, for him to look back at this point, because he's usually going forwards. But you know, in going forwards, he has to look back because the documentary is part of his, I hate the word, but it's part of his journey. And so in going forwards, you know, you do need to look back at what you've done. And something else Irvine said, I don't think it made it into the final film, but something he said on camera about failure quite early on, like how we learn nothing from, we learn nothing from success. We only learn from failure. And I'd never thought about that. Failure was always my biggest fear. And in making this film, part of my journey was I'm not afraid of failure anymore. I think I don't set out now and go, right, how can I fail today? But when I do fail, as I do on a daily basis, I try and, you know, embrace it or accept it and see what I can learn from it. Because as Irvine said, you know, you learn very little from success when you do something well. So yeah, nostalgia is something that is it's difficult to escape, and obviously we're seeing that at the moment. A lot of us nostalgia about the 90s with Oasis getting back together, and I allow myself little moments, but I'm wary to, you know, bask in it too much. I think it can be a very heady and intoxicating thing if you let it.
No, absolutely, yeah. But I think like the way it's done, this like the Kierkegaard quote, that is very much on point. Because I think like in society you always get this like negative association with nostalgia, but it can also be a mode of engaging with the past. Where it's not necessarily that you want to live in the past, it's just you need to look back on it to live in the present and to move forward. Yeah,
I mean, when you look at things like Brexit, a very damaging thing that for some people may have been about nostalgia for, you know, a UK that they were imagining or wanted to still exist, which hadn't existed for a long time. And we're not going back to how the UK was. So nostalgia can be great. It can also be dangerous, I think.
No, absolutely, yeah. This, I think the point that you made with not fearing failure was a really interesting one, because that I also found that really striking, because you don't really get that a lot, I think, in this day and age where it's a lot of polished surfaces. So somebody going and, you know, like saying like it's actually like failure can be an opportunity as well. But I found that really interesting in the documentary. So speaking of, I mean, the documentary is about Irvine Welsh. What I find interesting as well was then, you know, exploring the other side of successes, and Trainspotting was such a massive success. And I got the sense at the beginning of the documentary that it's also kind of like one of these like defining, it can be a defining feature where you'd reduce an author to a single work. And I got this sense of defiance, like going against that, where you're more than this one single thing that some contexts reduce you to, where he's boxing, he's playing football, like he's doing all these things, he's DJing, instead of just being the guy who wrote Trainspotting. I was just wondering, as a documentary filmmaker, how do you capture this essence of a person? How do you portray a person that is so complex, and how do you choose which parts to leave out and which things make the final cut then?
That's a great question. I think with Irvine, it was a case, I mean, I already knew Irvine. We'd been friends for a few years, so I knew him pretty well. I got to know him, you know, more through making a film with him. And I think for me, it was about these themes. So thinking about the themes in any of our lives, you know, these big questions. So existence, mortality, love, family, place and belonging, hedonism, addiction, all of these things inform his work. I mean, his latest book, Men in Love, you know, is about love. It's about how at the end of Trainspotting, what these men go off and do, the loving relationships they form that replace these friendships. So starting with those themes, those were ways of asking Irvine about them. And all of the, you know, times that we did, you know, interviews where it was just me and Irvine in a studio, all my questions would be in those themes. So, you know, so now we're going to talk about Trainspotting, and we're going to talk about those things within Trainspotting, but then taking it into things, books like Glue. I mean, Glue's my favorite Irvine Welsh book. And Glue is very much, you know, one of those, because it takes place over like multiple decades. It's a journey. It covers all of those themes. You know, there's adolescence and youth and being young, and there's addiction, and there's, you know, mortality, and all of those things are in that book, and in a lot of the other books as well. I mean, another sort of theme of the book is authority, because, you know, we see in the film, Irvine tells us that when him and his pals were arrested for playing football on the street when they were 7, 8 years old, that is the inciting incident in Irving's life that makes him, I think, screw you to authority and want to actually rebel against that. And you see that in all of his work, that he is anti-authoritarian. With somebody like Irving, I think it's really difficult to make him seem uninteresting, because he is fascinating, he is interesting, he is erudite, he is intelligent, he is warm, he is empathic. He's just a really brilliant and flawed human being as well. I mean, he's got his flaws and he talks about them in the film, but with someone like Irvine Welsh as a subject, if you make a boring film, then you've done something really, really wrong. I think it's hard to write about him or make stuff about him and be boring, because he's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. No, that definitely comes across in the stories on screen. It was really interesting to watch, and also kind of him take charge of his narrative, where you kind of like the camera follows him, but it's not like it's not like it's overtaking the narrative. It's more that you give him the space to tell the story. So no, that definitely came across very, very well. One thing that you brought up there with a place, the sense of place and growing up in a certain place. So he grew up in Edinburgh. Trainspotting is set in Edinburgh, and then the documentary will also premiere in Edinburgh. So very distinct and regional there. And what I found really intriguing in the film was that he travels quite a lot. So you kind of take this regionality into like to an international and global context then, where he's so like such a, like associated to be one of the, Scottish writers. So Scottishness is such a distinct part of that. And I was just interested in just hearing your thoughts what that, like this sense of place, did that get a heightened emphasis by being in an international context instead of being set in Edinburgh? What's your take there?
Definitely, because I think some people have an idea of Irving that don't know very little about him, that he's this guy sitting in Scotland, in Edinburgh, writing these stories about the locals, and he's an internationalist. He's always like traveling. He never sits still. He's always out and about. He loves new experiences. He's somebody that we wanted to reflect that through traveling with him as much as possible. There were places that he went to that, due to sort of budget reasons, we didn't have the money to go to him. And he went to Australia while we were making the film, and we could have gone and filmed. I'd have loved to have filmed him in Australia, in the outback. It's a place that's quite close to my heart. It's where a lot of my family live. So it was a shame we didn't get to go to Australia. But I think, the interesting thing in the film is that I suppose we start in a liminal space of memory, where he's reading from Trainspotting. So we do start in Edinburgh, really. And then he spends the rest of the film, traveling around, but he ends up back in Edinburgh, and he talks about how doing, the DMT trip has reminded him where he belongs, that this is the place, and that place is home. That's with Emma and his friends, and, a place that is very, I think, really important in his life. I know that he, also spends time in Miami and London, but Edinburgh is somewhere he always comes back to. And I think it informs not only his work, but who he is, his identity, his friends here, and that sort of thing.
And home plays such an important role in nostalgia as well, right? This longing for a home, or the things we can't get back from the past that still are still part of us. So I think that was that tied in really nicely with mortality, life. It's like I have an onion question. Onions are one of my favorite metaphors, and I noticed in the very random, but I do love a good onion metaphor, and there was one in the documentary, so I was like immediately like typing it out, because for me the title "Reality is Not Enough" kind of changed meaning as I was watching the documentary. Because at first, because I'm doing so much research on Trainspotting, I was like, oh, okay, so it's probably linked to drugs. And then as we were progressing, yes, but also so much more. So you you have him as a writer, so it's writing where reality is not enough, where he imagines these characters that, come to life on the page. And then you also kind of you move from the writing to so many more different features there. And I was just wondering, because it's so, I don't know, it kind of captures this ambiguity of him as a person, of the writing, of us as audience members watching this, also where you can like interpret certain things in a certain way. And I was wondering, what is your take on the title, with like what aspects of reality are so central to the film or not?
The title was Irvine's idea, because we've had several different titles, and then he came up with Reality's Not Enough, and I thought about it and I thought, yeah, I really like it. And it's really, once we had that title, looking back in the transcripts of the interviews, and reality was mentioned so many times. You're right, it's a multi-layered meaning, in that, you know, reality for him as a person has never been enough, because he's always wanted to escape, and you know, that's sometimes escape through drugs, through the realities that drugs create that you take, but then also through, as a writer, being able to sort of write about, you know, different worlds and that sort of thing. So it was something that, you know, once we had that as a title, we were just very aware that, you know, there are alternate worlds that, you know, we create in our head a lot of the time, and thinking about, you know, in any scenario that makes you feel something, you know, often, usually when it's something that's painful, that's been in your mind done to you, you can think about the reasons why. And personally, one of the things that I was always not very good at was accepting rejection, whether that's, you know, a film funding rejection, or rejection in a relationship, or something like that. But then you think about it, if you can remove the kind of, you know, how much it is affected you in terms of if it's hurt you, for instance, and you can ask yourself, you know, why, or if I take the personal out of it, and the person that's done this has probably not intended to, you know, hurt me or cause me pain. But what we can sometimes do is we can imagine all these realities, they don't like me, or they think I'm worthless. And so I think thinking about, you know, reality and these alternate realities that we can create is really interesting in the film. And you mentioned in The Onion makes me chuckle, because, you know, that was Chad's line. And I remember, you know, you can see in the film that Irvine smiles as well, because it is one of those metaphors that people do use it, and it is good. But yeah, onions make you cry as well, you know, and some of these alternative realities, or the reasons that you can imagine why people have done things to you, can upset you too. So I think it's healthy to also, if you can imagine some of the bad reasons that something might happen, that you can also imagine that it hasn't been done with any intent to cause you pain. It took me a long time to learn that in life, you know, really too long, and you can become bitter. And I suppose one of the things I'm working on is trying not to visualize those realities that are negative, because it's hard, and it's easy to slip into that, to think that, you know, something's happened because someone has made up their mind about this, when usually it's not a personal thing. It's just a decision they've had to make because it's arbitrary, and these things, you know, happen that way.
No, absolutely. And also the way we touched on this before with the way we deal with failure, by kind of like, you can also alter your perception depending on which viewpoint you decide to take then, because we learn from it.
Yeah.
But you know, the point with onions make you cry is a really good one. I didn't even think about that.
I only thought of it then when
I
was visualizing when I do peel an onion, and always like having tears in my eyes.
But it's there for the metaphor, you know, like it's worth it.
My metaphors always revolve around either football or driving in journeys, and I can't even drive. So
neither can I. You already you mentioned that just now, with you can fall into this negative thinking pattern where you think about the worst outcomes possible, but like you can also try to actively think about the positive aspects of a situation, or at least like try to take the negative out of it. And I think this sense of always pushing for the next, or like going for the next thing, that Irvine has in his work, like looking for the next thing without being tied down by the past and nostalgia. I found that really interesting, because I'm one of the key authors I'm engaging with is Mark Fisher, and he talks about the cancellation of the future.
I love his work. Yeah.
So, and it's kind of like that is so ingrained in it, in a sense, and sometimes I find myself slipping into it as well, because it's so easy. But I think, like with your documentary, the outlook is more, I mean, I'm just thinking about the last shot, and it's so beautiful. It's just so scenic. What would you then, what would you say is the outlook there on the future? Like in Irvine's work, in the documentary itself?
I mean, I think, at the end of the film, he talks about finding the place where he belongs. And I think for me, from my perspective and thinking about it in all those other themes that we've been talking about, it is, I suppose, I found through making the film a sense of where I belonged in life. And films, making films is a challenging process. You go through, lots of peaks and troughs emotionally, personally. I mean, you as well as anything else you have in life. And for me, it was quite a cathartic film to make in a lot of ways. I learned a lot through it. I suppose, at the end, it's about, I think, being open to change and, not being fixed in your views. And as you get older, just being willing to do that sort of work on yourself, because a lot of people can become set in their ways and think that they're fixed as individuals. But I think we can always change. There's always the potential to, change your mind about things and be honest enough to realize that you've got something wrong and you need to fix it. I mean, David Bowie said something once about aging, and he said, the great thing about getting older is that you can become the person you always should have been. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment, that, whatever age you get to, within reason, not on your deathbed, but it's not too late to sort of be at a point in life where you can think, what I've been doing this wrong, and I'm gonna, try and do better. So that is the ending for me. It's a hopeful ending. It's an ending where you think, I can do better. I can change.
That was very beautifully put. I think that's a wonderful closing statement, actually.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and all the best with the premiere.
Thank you. It was really lovely to chat to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Paul and Naemi. So make sure to rate and subscribe to our channel wherever you get your podcasts, or sign up for our newsletter over at filmireland.ie.